No, go
I would
ahead.
say, which might be a great segue into our topic today about the different types of leaders.
Well, no, absolutely. And yeah, the different types of leaders we have, but it's a conversation I think probably for another day, right? But just the
Yeah.
idea of, especially as much experience as we have working and training
Yeah.
in government agencies, just that understanding of authority and the hierarchical culture that sometimes breeds that don't speak until the person above you've spoken, but it's just, it's everybody has somebody they respond to or they report to, right? So that's definitely that's another episode for sure. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And there, like, trying to find the right words here, but I think there's some trauma. We talked about trauma informed services. I think there's some trauma in leadership, at least in government leadership. There has to be a hierarchy. I won't ever dispute the fact that there has to be some people in charge. There has to be people in charge
uh,
of strategy. There has to be people who are focused on the structure. We do have to have people who are very smart in how we use government funds to make sure we're getting good outcomes and a good return on investment for tax dollars. All of those things are important. And having the right people in the right jobs, I think, is true for any kind of company, whether it's nonprofit or for profit. You have to have the right people in the right places. Um, and with that being said, leaders have to be really conscious of how they're leading and, like, the environment they create for people to do the work, because you can create a good environment where people can be highly successful, or you can create this environment where people are afraid to do anything more than what they're told to do. And then we're mad at them for not going above and beyond, when anytime anybody goes above and beyond, they get in trouble for it. A lot of mixed messages.
yeah. Well, I just had a coaching session this morning where um there was a manager who been in, you know, um state government leadership for over 20 years.
Mhm.
And he's awesome. And we had a great conversation and you can see, he's taken a lot of lessons to heart and really is a thoughtful leader who encourages folks to develop themselves. And he's developed his direct reports to develop their direct reports to,
Mhm.
to engage and to solve problems on their own and to develop their skills. And my question I had to him, he has three um, third level supervisors that have two levels of managers underneath them. And I said, well, it sounds like, you have the experience and the development of your style. How about your three direct reports? How do you feel about their development? And he's like, well, that's a mixed bag. And it's a great question because I can see what you're getting at. So I probably need to have more meetings with them about their ability to develop their stuff. And so you could see he got it, right? I didn't
Right.
have to say anything else, right? But it's a great question. I mean, managers, best managers are wonderful, right? But it's what about folks that are, and they usually will raise in organizations based off of their capability, hopefully, right? But there's also managers who become managers because they're very good at what they do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, but that doesn't always translate to leading people, right? So, um, he committed to when he has his one-on-one meetings with the staff he already does to have that conversation, and also when they have larger managers meetings to bring up that conversation and develop more of the critical thinking and the encouragement to do things, and to take those chances, that growth mindset, and to embrace trying things that may not necessarily always work because we can always figure that out. So, but it was just interesting, what you talked about. It's absolutely true, but it's that next level as well. As good as you can be wonderful. What about those folks underneath you? How are you helping them to get to that next level themselves, right? Which, as you mentioned, there's six different styles of leadership that, that we're going to talk about real quick. Those are different leadership styles. So, yeah.
So I have the first one here, which is the coercive, that's not even a real word, coercive leadership style. This one always reminds me of um The Devil Wears Prada. Do you remember that movie?
I
Glenn
do.
Close.
I do.
Glenn,
My
I
my
think it's
wife
Glenn
maybe
Close.
watched it. It's Anne Hathaway and Meryl Streep, I think.
Meryl
Yeah.
Streep, Glenn Close, Glenn
Yeah.
Close. I'm on a whole different story. I'm gonna get bashed for that one. Sorry, sorry. Meryl Streep. The disrespect is grave here. But um it always reminds me of her character. I know her character's name is Miranda Priestley. How about that? I know the character name, but not the actress. Um, she was very, very coercive. Basically, like she ruled by punishment. She's very authoritative. Everything was her way. She wasn't supportive. She wasn't helpful. Just really, really cutthroat. And of course, in like this very um, dramatic movie, you see the impact that it has. But we still have like coercive leaders in the workplace that just rule by punishment and do what I say, not what I do. Have you had any experience with a coercive leader?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And thinking about that, they demand results, right? They demand instant compliance. You need to do what I say. Why? Because I said so, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I've had leaders like that, and they're very in your face, very understanding what they want and not really thoughtful of what other people necessarily need. And there's that drive where, a lot of times they want results at this, for at the sake of other people, right? I had a manager one time that I worked for where I had another manager say, your boss, she gets results, but she doesn't see the trail of bodies she leaves behind to
Absolutely.
achieve those results. And I said, well, she doesn't, but we keep track. We try to go behind and help people up and let them know, right?
Right.
So, but then, you know, you that's the challenge though, right? It's just like the TKI, right? If you are that competitive type of conflict resolution person, there's a time and place for it. But if you always use competition, no one wants to compete with you. So people will stop playing ball with you because they figure you always have to win,
Yeah.
right? So that directive style just doesn't leave much opportunity for leeway to express yourself and to be creative and think of new ways to accomplish it. How about you?
I've definitely had some coercive leaders, and I didn't last long because I'm not one to be coerced. Autonomy is incredibly important to me. And sometimes that makes me hard to lead. I'll be the first to admit. I feel sorry for whoever my boss is.
Yeah.
Because if there's one thing that I'm gonna do, it's whatever I want.
Mhm.
And again, within reason, I'm very dedicated to the outcomes. I'm very dedicated to the purpose of what we do, but I'm not always one to just follow the rules for the sake of following them if I don't see that they have value.
Yeah.
So if I have someone that's like, do what I say or else, challenge accepted, challenge accepted. And that type
Yeah.
of style really brings out the worst in me.
Yeah.
And I don't stay long.
Yeah. And different people have different reactions to that, right? But
Right.
I'm basically, if you're not given the reason to change or to get something done and you don't know the why, it's going to be initial resistance, automatic,
Yeah.
right? And some people will, fight, flight, or freeze kicks in, right? The fight is no, I need to, yeah, let's go. And the flight is I'm out of here. See you. It's time to go somewhere else, right? And
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I remember a particular like incident where I had a coercive leader, and believe it or not, he wasn't even my direct supervisor. He was my supervisor's peer, but he was coercive with her and she never stood up to him. He basically bullied everybody in the office. And that's coercive leadership has its time and its place. I'm not going to say that it's never appropriate. There are going to be some times where we need someone to take charge and make decisions, and that's true. It's effective in a very short-term
uh-huh.
way, but as an ongoing leadership style, you don't really gain a lot of like love and compassion. And so I remember him coming to my desk and saying, I need you to do this. And I'm like, well, what you're asking me to do is 100% contrary to what the policy says. The policy says specifically to not do that. He says, but I'm telling you to do it. And I said, and I'm telling you, I'm not going to. He says, I am the supervisor and you are going to do what I say. And I said, oh, okay, cool. Keep telling yourself that because I'm actually not going to do it. And I really think that if you want it done, you should probably do it yourself. And I
Mm.
stood on business and I did not do it. And I refused to
Mhm.
do it. And I'll be honest now, I probably could have done it. I probably would have done it. If he had approached me in a maybe a different way and say, hey, this is what I think we should do. Do you think it's in the best interest of the customer? Do you think it's in the best interest of this? I probably could have been swayed to maybe participate in that discussion, but the whole do it because I said so was an immediate no for me. When it
Yeah.
was fight, flight, or freeze, I was choosing fight, and I was going down with the ship on that one. And
Yeah.
by the way, in that particular instance, it was not in the best interest of the client, which is why I was so adamant that I was not going to do it because it was
Sure.
not in their best interest. So I got little tiny flack for that. Because then it got to my direct supervisor and she had to have a conversation with me and said, it's been brought to my attention that you wouldn't do what the other supervisor said. And I said, yeah, you heard right. And she's like, well, if another, I said, no. And she's like, okay.
Yeah.
She was not an authoritative, authoritarian in any way. She just kind of let me do what I want.
Yeah.
It wasn't too bad for me, but it was definitely bad for me in how I felt about that company because I didn't stay there long after that. I won't be bullied in my workplace. Sorry.
I had an old supervisor who her famous words were, I ain't going to jail for any of you. And that's how she said things. And she said it as a funny thing. I mean, we always smile when she said it, but it was also something she could say to her
Yeah,
boss or her boss's boss. This isn't in the regs. I ain't going to jail for anybody. Right. And so
right.
that was her way of saying, I'm not going to get it done. And I'm trying to be nice about it. But it's
Yeah,
something I've learned. No, I'm not, this is not something, I'm not losing my job over this. If this is something, and they're not asking me to do it, they're telling you to do it. You're telling me to do this. I need written, because I've seen people lose their jobs. I've seen people get thrown under the bus.
yeah.
All right, well, I asked Tiffany to do it and she did it. I mean, she didn't have to, right? And those things like that. So yeah.
Well, that makes me think about like another idea here. This is one of the reasons why there's so little trust in the
Mhm.
organizations, and where people are always feeling like they have to cover their assets. The CYA,
Yeah.
cover your
Cover your
assets.
assets. Yeah.
And so, where I see this often, and what I kind of pay attention to kind of get the vibe of an organization is looking at their documentation, any of their documentation, or even email. So if it all says like per Tiffany did this, per Carl did that, per so and so did this, then that right there tells me that there's somebody who is just telling people what to do and they're not buying into it. And they also want to make sure if it's not the right decision, they know who to blame.
Yeah.
So if you look at this and you're like, oh, you shouldn't have done that. Well, per Carl, he told me to, and that's who you should go talk to. I just followed orders. So people there in that type of environment, they're not like critically thinking. They're not looking at what's in the best interest of the purpose. They're really just doing, I'm only going to do what I'm told, nothing more, nothing less, which is why this is not a great style for long-term leadership
Yeah. Or buy-in
or
or
buying.
performance engagement. I mean, how many managers have you had that said, well, hey, this is what they want. We got to get it done. Or this is coming from the state. We got to figure out how to do it. So,
Right.
don't shoot the messenger, right? Those
Right.
are conversations that are had on a regular basis. And all it does is kill engagement because now you think you're siding with your staff, but what your staff is saying is you have no power to fix or to be an advocate for them. And
Right.
so they don't see you as somebody who leads them. They see you as part of the system of people who are making their jobs and their lives harder, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I tell people that all the time. Look, if something comes down, figure it out. How are we going to get this done? When welfare reform, when it came through in 2006, right? I told I was a supervisor. I told my assistant program director at the time, let me talk with my staff. And he said, why? I said, because I'm concerned that we're turning our social workers into data processors, right? And so let me see what there are some of their ideas on how to approach this. So I had an extra long staff meeting. I let them know a half an hour later. And, in the staff meeting we met and the half an hour came, I said, this is what's happening. It's coming down the pipe. It's going to be implemented early next year. This is my concern. Let them voice their concerns and said, okay, so, um, you know, I I've been given permission to have this conversation to figure out what are some things we can do to address it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And we came up with a bunch of ideas, right? And we went through each one and decided which was feasible, which one was
Mm-hmm.
someone's going to jail over, and what were
Right.
some of the things that we could escalate. And some of our ideas that we escalated to senior staff got into the plan that was submitted to the state for how we implemented the new rules in welfare reform. And so I had a team full of committed folks who realized, hey, our conversation was heard, and some of those ideas that we had are now going to be implemented. So now I'm invested in seeing that they're going to be carried out correctly. That's what leadership does, right? Puts their staff in a position to succeed and to have that ownership and not just pass the buck. If we pass the buck onto our staff's going to pass it on to their customers,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so it's yeah, it's so just because I said so, if we're not given a real rationale, a real reason to get it done, the coercive piece, that just keeps people from being able to explain why this is important, why this is something that will benefit us, right? And how is it going to keep our organization afloat in a better financial position, maybe hire more folks or really serve
Right.
our customers, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and tapping into like the incentive of doing the work, like who does it benefit? How will they benefit? How does it affect us as a whole? So, what you were just describing there is very much in line with an authoritative leadership style, not to be confused with an authoritarian leadership style, but authoritative where the authority goes to the people doing the work. And really
Mm.
what, this type of leader does, it connects people with like the greater good, like what's the big picture, what's the purpose, what's the vision, what's our mission here? And then people are bought into that idea, and so a lot of their day to day, how we do the work is going to be up to them. The leader just keeps people connected back to why we're doing it. How are people being helped? Is it helping us get closer to our vision? What are your thoughts about that type of authoritative leadership? Again, keeping people connected to the bigger picture.
Well, it's communicative, right? So you're, keeping people in the loop, which is always one of the key things that staff wants, right? That
Mm-hmm.
employees want. They just want to know where they stand. No one likes a pop quiz, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they want to know where they stand, and we can give them updates. We can help build their capacity to make these decisions. I, I tell people all the time, look, the greatest thing about developing a team that can do your job is that you can go on vacation and not worry about the building burning down. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how much more relaxing can a vacation be when you're sitting on the deck drinking a Mai Tai or on the beach or whatever it is you're doing, knowing that your staff has it. And that when you come back, if there was any issues that it was taken care of, or at least there were actions that were being implemented for you to review rather than we're just sitting here waiting for stuff. And especially, some of the organizations we work for, if you sit there on your hands, it affects people's lives,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so, to do it, yeah, self-confidence and belief that your staff has that capacity, they don't need you. I mean, how wonderful is it when your staff can take care of things on your own? How does that make you look, right?
Right. Right.
You know, and then the empathy, right? To hear people's concerns and to hear, and to feel how they feel about something, what's something that we can help them to elevate, right? And to get better at, or to develop those skills, right? And the change, affecting change, letting people know the why, right? And creating that coalition of folks who can communicate and spread the word, like those penguins did in a where iceberg is melting. I'm sure you've seen that, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
how do we get all those folks moving in the same direction? It's really, you know, yeah, I'm the boss, but I'm also the person who has a team of subject matter experts that I rely on, and I trust you, right? And it's really letting go of ego, right? I was listening to podcast yesterday. It was Carmelo Anthony, who was a famous
Mhm.
basketball player, and he was talking about when two superstars get together, one of them has to give up the keys,
Mhm.
right? And he was talking about when LeBron James went to Miami, Dwayne Wade gave LeBron the keys. And he said that's not easy because every superstar has an ego. And one of the people on the podcast said, well, that doesn't always like that. He goes, it's always like that. He says, you may not see it, but it's always like that. When two superstars come together, one of them has to decide that they are Robin and allow the other person to be Batman. Otherwise,
Mhm.
it does not work, right? And a good leader recognizes that if they are a Batman, there are times where they can hang out, maybe not necessarily be Robin, but maybe be Alfred,
Right.
right?
Right.
Who provides that wisdom and guidance to Batman in a way that helps him to become, or Wonder Woman, right? Wonder Woman's mother, right? To
Yeah.
provide that sage advice to allow them to be the heroes that they are and that they could be. So, yeah, I'm all for the authoritative. It's just, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot
Yeah.
of time, and you can't get those quick decisions done. But this is all about development, right? If you want quick wins and to, get your name up there and get your ideas pushed forward, then, be the authoritarian. But authoritative, that's about, I want my staff to grow past me,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I think too, um, this comes back to again how we work in the 21st century. Back in maybe like the 30s, 40s, 50s, you started with one company, you stayed with that company until you retired. You got your little gold Rolex at your retirement, and you were happy. And that's not how we work nowadays. And a lot of times we can't keep people staffed because there's just, especially in human services, there's so much work to be done, and the amount of work that government workers do. I know government has a reputation for not doing anything, but that's not that's not true. That was a scam. That's why I signed up to be a government worker, because I heard that workers don't do anything. I said, "Ooh, that's right in line with my career goals." But it's a
Sounds like the
lot
must
of
be
work.
nice. Sounds like the must
Yeah,
be nice
yeah,
mentality, right?
yeah. But it's a pyramid scheme, let me tell you, because it's a lot of work. And I bought right into it. So I'm a girl boss now. No, I'm just joking. Um, but with that being said, I think that a lot of people that get into like the work that's not going to necessarily lead them to like riches and fame, like government service, you're not going to get rich and famous in government unless you
Right.
like commit fraud, which I don't recommend to a friend.
Yeah.
Um, but for the most part, it's we people do it because of the purpose, the value that it contributes to society. And you know, I try not to give Jillian Michaels a lot of airtime, but she does have a quote that I really, really enjoy, and that is that effort without purpose feels like punishment. And
Huh.
that's the authoritative leader. Why I think they are so effective is because they do keep people connected back to the purpose, not just what we're doing, but why we do it. And keep people connected to that big picture, because there's no one right way to accomplish anything. And I don't know what everybody's performance evaluations look like, but there's almost always something about takes initiative. Like people are evaluated on taking initiative. But outside of an authoritative leadership style, then a lot of times, like let's say in a coercive style, what if I take initiative to do a task a different way? I might get some feedback like, who told you you could do it like that? Right? So you want me to show initiative, but if I show initiative now, it's negative. But in an authoritative style, if someone takes initiative and maybe it doesn't work out, there's still a little bit of that curiosity. Well, what were you trying to accomplish there? What were you hoping would happen? Oh, I thought it would help these people. I thought it would make this faster. Okay, great. That's in line with our mission or our purpose. How could you do it differently next time to be more in
Right.
line with the outcome? So it's like an idea that people do have the autonomy and creativity and expertise to be able to do their work in a way that's in line with what the goals are. It may not work every time, but people are not punished for trying something different. There's
Right.
it's celebrated. It's celebrated. And again, I'm the boss, but I'm not the expert. And I'm going to rely on you as the expert to do what you think is best, as long as it's in line with the vision or the
Yeah.
goal. So I really prefer that type of style. I tend to be one that I think leans into purpose a lot. I really do feel like if we don't talk about why we do what we do, we get disconnected from it, especially in times like now that everybody's feeling like the pressure of being short staffed and high workloads. That if all we do is talk about the work, the tasks, the work, the tasks, the spreadsheets, the reports, the
The
deadlines, that
numbers. Yeah.
the numbers, the whatever, and not who's benefiting, how is it impacting people, how is it impacting the world, we're not going to be able to retain people, and they're not going to do good work because they're just overwhelmed, and the work doesn't feel like a reward anymore, it feels like a punishment, and that's not
Yeah.
sustainable. It's
Yeah.
just not sustainable.
Totally true.
Yep.
Yeah. My favorite supervisors are always the ones who, if I came up with some harebrained scheme, they'd say, well, let me ask.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They never just shut me down. Oh, we've never done that before. Or, that's not something that we generally support. No, it's, well, let me ask. What's the worst thing they can say is no.
Yeah.
And we got some real things done,
Yeah.
where I was. And that was always one of my favorite, memories of working in that environment where I felt supported, you know.
Yeah. Well, those authoritative leaders, a lot of times they're the power that they're really exerting is not like the authority in the sense that a coercive one to do it or there's going to be a punishment, which is that type of coercive power. But these authoritative leaders oftentimes are really relying on being like the experts in their field. So they know the industry, they know the work, but they're also very charismatic in the sense that they connect with people. And so they have a lot of that referent power where people trust them. And because they trust them, they're willing to go the extra mile. They're willing to try new things because they know that they'll be supported. And I think that's why that's one of my favorite type of leadership styles.
And those
As someone
eyes.
who values autonomy,
Yeah.
I really like to feel like I'm trusted to do what I think is best and be allowed to make mistakes and learn from them versus being punished for trying something different. Right. Because remember, I said I challenge the status quo. That's my superpower.
Yeah. Very cool. And then how about
Well,
affiliative?
affiliative. Well, that one I really I appreciate. I'm trying to find the right words here because I do like affiliative power. That one is very much connected to like relationships and working well together, which I appreciate. Where I think it might have a bit of um, shortfalls is that when when people rely too much on that style, then it's hard to know who's in charge. And when decisions have to be made, and that leader maybe needs to step into a more authoritarian type of position and make a decision, they may have a really hard time getting people on board because, well, you didn't consult me on this, and so I don't like it.
Yeah.
And I've always been included. Now I'm not being included, so I might be resistant. Um, and because it's so heavily rooted in relationships, if you're not able to form that relationship with maybe one or two people, because there's always one or two Yahoo in the office that just hates everybody,
Yeah.
you may not get that buy-in, and that strategy doesn't impact them in the same way. So you may not have the best results because they just don't connect with you.
Yeah.
So what do you
Yeah.
think?
Well, it's more of my natural style. And
Mhm.
I'm definitely relationship oriented. I'm a straight down the middle S in disc, right? If
Mm,
any of you know disc, I'm so boring. I don't lean towards the I, don't lean towards the C. I am straight down the middle, high S, right? It's all about relationships. It's all about connecting with people. And if
everything
I'm not
makes sense.
careful,
Uh-huh.
yeah. And if I'm not careful, I spend so much time on that relationship and so conscientious on that relationship that results don't happen in an effective
Hmm.
way or as effective as they can be. So this is the way I operate, and I think I get people connected with me and develop loyalty and develop a sense of we're in this together, and they know they're supported through empathy, right, and communication, so that I can deliver bad news. I can deliver tough conversations. I can have crucial conversations with folks, but at the same time, I have to be intentional in knowing it's important to build those, but also results have to happen as well. So,
Yeah.
you know, um, when is too much, right? So that's definitely, where I see, when it comes to affiliative, it's great. It's so important. You have to have people like this on your team, right? Like I mentioned, that manager who just burned everyone and left people behind wondering what the heck just rolled over me. I was usually the person who came in and reestablished the conversation. Hey, yeah, okay, well, yeah, we went through that, and so we apologize. What is it that you need, moving forward, so that next time we have this, and just to really have that supportive, empathetic conversation with folks, so they knew there was at least somebody who could convey their needs and wishes to that that boss in a way, and I knew how to talk with her. It's just if other folks weren't necessarily as versed in her style and they had different styles, it was really a lot of my job to go back and reestablish that connection and try to reestablish that their needs can be met as well. How do we do this? Right. So it's definitely something that's a challenge. How about you? How do you feel about affiliative?
I do think, I mean, I'm high on relationships too. I'm not an S, I'm a high I, if you haven't met me
Mhm.
before. With a little moonlighting in the D section from
Yeah.
time to time.
Yeah.
But for the most part, again, I really respect people and value and try to meet them where they're at. And relationships are incredibly important to me. And I try to maintain really good, positive relationships with people in the workplace. Um, but I'm also, again, a high I, and I'm also a Scorpio, if that means anything to you. But so sometimes that relationship, if the relationship is not positive, then that can create some blocks to doing good work. And so that's why, again, I really appreciate like valuing people and connection and empathy and compassion. That's something that's incredibly important to me in the workplace. But when there's a relationship breakdown and no conflict resolution, then that's where I think a lot of us versus them mentality can start to begin. If there's not another structure in place, um, like a backup plan for when the relationships are not working well, how do we make sure that the work still gets done? Because, you know, it just takes one person getting their feelings hurt for that whole, all of that bond and all of the cohesiveness and the collegiality to get broken down. And then
Yeah.
that's where getting it back on track might be challenging.
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
I think that for me as a person, um, I've had a lot of opportunity for growth in that particular area. Um, because I haven't always been great at being professional, I think is the word maybe I'm looking at. I'm just, again, authenticity is really important to me. So if I don't care about who you are, or you've done something offensive to me, or I just don't vibe with you, I, that's not something that I've kept a secret, you know? And that's not always the best approach. And I think with time and as I've learned, like lessons learned, I've come to realize I don't have to be besties with everybody. We don't have to always get along as human beings, but we can still have good professional relationships. And I
Yeah.
think that for me has been a huge area of growth in my life. I know if you had asked 10 years ago, probably wouldn't have been a true story, but I think now, with a few exceptions, I think I can navigate those professional relationships really well. But I think it just takes one person that just doesn't fit the vibe that can kind of ruin that affiliative leadership style because it throws off the whole group,
Yeah.
right? And then they feel excluded or they feel othered, and that can impact them, but it in fact impacts the rest of the team as well. And then it's a lot of distraction from the task part of the work, right? Because the relationships are important, but so is the work. I think that it can impact when there's not that balance. So,
Yeah, it's a balance. It really is. And we have to be intentional in that balance. We
mhm,
can't
for
just
sure.
go with the flow, go with our gut, because our gut will lead us down one path. And
Right.
there has to be, there's time for one path, there's a time for other paths, and recognizing, just like the next one, going from affiliative to democratic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where, and in democratic, kind of, I keep looking at the DISC scale, but I feel like coercive is like a D, and then authoritative is more like an I, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have affiliative more of an S or like an IS.
Mm-hmm.
Democratics maybe more of that, S going towards a C, right? But it's, getting your hands dirty and doing what, your staff would do, right? And really creating that leadership where there are no leaders, right? And you see it a lot in tech, right? And project management,
Right.
right? And so, hey, we all have ideas, we're all experts in the field. What are your thoughts? My ideas, my direction is the same, carries the same weight as yours, right? So let's have that conversation, and so it builds collaboration, right? And it can be very helpful in designing creative ways of approaching things, right? And sometimes it's great to, when we're trying to heal by reaching out to different departments, different staff members, it can break down silos where, because like we talked, and I mentioned, you actually, Tiffany brought this up, before we started to for the podcast, the must be nice attitude, which I I verbalize as when people from different departments, different organizations, different parts of the building, right, different offices, when they have conflicting ideas about departments, right? And I've had one department I've been in that didn't talk to a department that was right next door to us, and we had the same customers, right? And so it affected customer service as much as it affected our relationships. And when I became a supervisor, what I realized what it was about was the other person didn't know what the other person did, right? And so they just made assumptions, and when we make assumptions, our brain fills in that assumption with worst case scenario, right? Our limbic
Right.
responses. And so it's, well, they don't work as hard as us. They don't do things like us. They're not doing things the right way, right? And so, democratic, I think, can be helpful, and we're reaching out and we want that collaboration, which takes time, right? And we got to get people and help people feel like they're all, you know, cooperating, and that all of their input is valuable, and it's going to make a difference, right? But that's a good part of it, right? And
Right.
what do you think, Tim?
I think that, that democratic style can work. But again, here I am. Remember, I told you I am the people displeaser. Um, the challenge that I see with the democratic leadership style is that a lot of times leaders think that they're being democratic when they're
Yeah,
not, and it's performative and it's not real. And the staff catch on to that really quickly. And so there's some trauma with that democratic leadership style because when staff are invited to share their voice, right? What do you think about this? What are your ideas? What are your perspectives? And we invite them to give us feedback and then do nothing with it. Then that is performative, right?
right.
um, and people will no longer share their ideas. They have what we call like the meeting after the meeting. So, if I come in as a manager and say, hey, we're going to be doing XYZ, what do you all think? And people are like, you know, like, not me, not me. What, right? Because I gave you a good idea in 1998 and you didn't listen to me then. So why should I share with you now? And then later on, the meeting's over and I'm like, Carl, you know what they should do? They should do this and they
Yeah,
should do that. But you know what? They never listen to us.
no,
Right. And so if you're going to use democratic leadership, which I do think has value, it does have buy-in. People do feel like they can use their expertise, their competency is rewarded. There's a lot of good things that can come from that if it's used like authentically, but there has to be like an environment where people are able to give feedback without strings attached. It's
mhm,
not just about sharing my opinion. I like this, I don't like it, which to me is very hollow. Tell me what it is that will work for you. Tell me what's not going to work for you and why. Let's figure out a solution.
yeah,
But staff and anybody who's contributing has to have the mindset that I can give my opinion or I can give my feedback but nobody's under any obligation to use it. It's
Yeah.
just information. And I'm giving you the gift of information, and what you choose to do with it is really up to you, but there has to be trust there. And if again, leaders are saying, let's do a survey and find out what our staff thinks. And they say, okay, the number one issue is that they have too much work. Ah, well, they're just being lazy. They just need to do their work. I don't know why everybody's complaining. Then at
Yeah.
that point, you're not in a democratic leadership style. You're just having people go through the motions to say, well, we did a survey, but then do nothing with it. It absolutely sends the wrong message. So
Yeah. Or those
yeah,
people that say, "Hey, look, this is a situation that we're in, and I've thought about it, and I think maybe this is, if we did this before, and maybe we can institute it again. What do you think? I want your opinions, right?
right,
Well, if there's no psychological safety, whatever,
right,
sounds like we've done that before. We probably should do it again. At the end of it, without saying it, you're the boss, right? So,
right, right.
it's
Or
you got to have that
anonymous
trust.
survey. Yeah,
Yeah,
anonymous survey my ass, right?
yeah,
That's
yeah,
nothing anonymous. You got my login information. People won't give you the right information. And the people who will share are the ones who are highly, highly outspoken, who are oftentimes the ones that are dead inside. Like I I I quit this job a long time ago, but I'm still gonna work here till I retire. And I'm going to tell you all of my grievances, and I'm going to speak for everybody, but it's not really valuable because it's just a bunch of grievances
yeah,
versus real solutions. It's just
yeah,
pointing out everything that's wrong instead of looking at, like, okay, let's acknowledge what's wrong, because there's always going to be room for growth in any company. But what's the solution? How can we make it work versus
yeah.
just it's never going to work?
Yeah,
How
and if
can
there isn't an And on the flip side, if there's no boundaries in leadership, you might have their buddies, their happy hour buddies who are just gonna go along with what they say and back them up, right? So,
right, right,
that's the challenge, right? There has to be a time where, we're truly forging that consensus. That's great. Okay, and once that's done, then which, getting to the end of it, I mean, we have all of these styles within us, right? And so there's a time and place for everyone, right? Democratic
right,
is to get those ideas and then how do we carry them out, right? Which
right,
is, the a lot of it is that pace setting,
right,
right? And so setting standards. Okay, we've had those ideas. Thank you for all of those. We've went through the pros and cons. We went through what's beneficial, what's you know, budgetary wise, time wise, materials. Okay, so we've decided this is the best way forward. We've even taken a survey and voted on it. Great, right? Now, what are our milestones? What do we, what are we set to accomplish? What is success going to look like? What is our vision, right? And, like you mentioned, am I a leader who leads from the front? Am I the leader who leads with this sword in the front? Or am I the leader who leads from the tent and has the risk board out and gives you all the ideas on how to do things and go forth and dominate? you know, and so, really, that pace setter is let's get stuff done, let's move forward, let's plan this out. What does success look like? Come on, guys, come with me. Let's get this done, right? And you're charismatic, right? And that rah, the football coach, right? And let's get it in. And and then I know there's people who would say, well, I wouldn't do something that I wouldn't ask my staff to do,
right.
right? And that's the thought process there for sure. So, getting their hands dirty, right? And actually in the midst of the construction site building, and then putting the timber together to lay those foundations and to create the framework and to be in there, as much as our staff with that, hey, if they see me doing this with this type of energy, then they're going to follow through with that as well. Yeah. Or at
I
least
think
that's what I get from it.
yeah, pace setting for me is really about like setting those high standards, calling people to be great in their job. And I think that that does have a time and place where we want to be excellent. I don't think any company or any organization sets out to be like, oh my gosh, we should be mediocre. I think we should be mediocre. That is the the bare minimum is the goal here. I don't think anyone intentionally sets out that way, but it does happen in the way that, again, we sometimes give feedback or set expectations So in that pace setting style, it is about setting the bar a bit higher and really asking people to step into their own greatness and be good and have these great outcomes, both individually and collectively, which I think can be really inspirational. You know, I want you to be the best version of yourself. Um, and again, that leader is doing it as well. I don't just expect it from you, it's a collective effort. The only again, here I come again, the displeaser. The challenge with, I think, pace setting is that if the expectations are so high that they're not sustainable, then people are going to get burnt out. And so there
Right.
has to be like some opportunities for people to catch their breath where we're not always setting these really high standards. It's maybe for a particular project or a period of time or whatever the situation is. This type of style actually reminds me of my husband. He, I think, is a pace setter. He's very much a perfectionist. He's a C on the disc. He's a very high C, and he think like he worked in food service. He used to manufacture flavors, so these are things that people would consume in their body. And his kind of standard for his staff was, if you wouldn't feed this to your family, we're not sending it out.
Yeah.
And his standards for like cleanliness, his standards for sterilization, his standards for all of those things were much higher than the state or the regulatory bodies. So if they said you can have this much bacteria per inch, he's like, absolutely not, because I wouldn't feed that to my dog. So we're going to have zero. And he was very, very much about excellence, but he also would do the work. He would get in there and do it. If they were having a problem, he wouldn't be like, go fix the problem. He'd be like, let's fix the problem. Let's go figure it
Right.
out. And so even in times where and again, seats, as you know, are very task focused. Let's get the work done and let's get it done right. Um, he would really like their work kind of was cyclical. So they'd have busy periods and then slower periods. And so for his staff during those busy periods, he would really just demand a lot from them, saying, this order has to get to this customer by Friday. So I need you all to really be committed and let's do 12-hour days, let's do shifts, let's get this done. And then
Hmm.
next week we'll spend the week cleaning up and, taking it easy. But so when he needed them to really step into that hard time, they would do it because they knew that was going to, number one, he would appreciate it. He was very good at like appreciation, but two, he wouldn't expect that pace day after day after day. And so when things were a bit slower, he allowed them to kind of catch their breath and still be productive, but not push themselves to the brink of burnout, which a lot of managers, oh, I see you can perform at this level. Keep that pace for the rest of your career. And if you dip below
Yeah.
that, you're going to have some consequences. I think that's not realistic. And why, again, mediocre becomes the standard
Yeah.
because we burn people out. They don't stay.
Yeah. But you also hear people, well, don't be a high performer because they're just going to give you more work, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
I still
I
think we
get it.
should demand excellence though. You know what I mean? I still think
Sure,
people should
sure.
should want to do good work. Want to do good work.
One of the challenges, though, you mentioned that the idea of the high expectations, right? And um, sometimes managers that utilize the pace setting style, if they demand that higher standard and people are not living up to that style, rather than spending the time lifting them up, they will just say, "Fine, I'll just do it on my own." Next thing you know, they're in the weeds and they're taking care of stuff. And the only reason I'm mentioning this is because I've had so many coaching clients in the last couple months talking about, you know, um, they have too much of the work that they did in the level below, right? And it's because the level below is doing a lot of work that people the level below were doing, right? And so, but that all it makes sense if like with Cat's diagram, the further you go up in management, the more strategic and conceptual you become, and um, uh,
Hands
the
on.
less technical, the
Yeah.
less hands-on technical skills that you have. But like we mentioned, some managers are hired because they're very good at the technical skills. So it's not just a control issue very often, it's an esteem issue, it's an identity issue. This
Yeah.
was something I was really good at, and I feel better when I'm doing that as I'm learning my management style, but I can't really grow into my management style because I'm too busy in the weeds doing those things that make me feel good,
Hmm.
right? And so
Right.
as much as that pace setter leads from the front, and I won't ask you to do anything that I wouldn't do, at the same time, like you've mentioned already, how do we let our folks grow into who they can be so that, you know, they can end up doing our job, which elevates our entire unit and our entire department. So that's something that's definitely, important to pay attention to, especially for pace setters.
Yeah. I know for me, I'm a pace setter with myself.
Hmm.
I demand excellence for me like my whole life. I'm like a type A personality,
Hmm.
as easygoing as I can be from time to time. When it comes to what I expect out of myself, I think that I'm always like, if I get a B in a class, oh, I might as well just quit school altogether, right? I'm
Yeah.
not meant to be educated. Like I have really high standards for me, and that comes to the workplace as well. I want to do the best job that I absolutely can, but I've had to learn, even as an individual, and this is going to be true in leadership as well, is that again, we can be great and we can demand excellence and we can really have high standards, but we also have to be flexible because we know that, again, that's really, really hard to sustain long periods of time. I found that out last year when I had like I have these meltdowns. I used to have them like, I said once a year. My husband says once every 3 months, but I just would like to announce I've been meltdown free for over a year now, where I just get to a point where I work and work and work myself so hard and sustaining that. Again, I want to do the best job I can, that I just get exhaust myself, like physically, emotionally, spiritually, all of the any ways that I can, am just exhausted where I reach a breaking point. And usually what happens is that um, I cry. I just break out into like ugly Kim Kardashian crying, like for no,
Yeah.
like it could be anything. A jeans commercial will set me off. And then I just cry and I cry until I fall asleep. And then I sleep for like 12, 14 hours. And I wake up the next day, like, all right, everything's good. Let's keep going. And my
Yeah.
poor spouse, my husband who loves me so much is like, what is wrong with you? What do I need to do? And I'm like, nothing's wrong. I'm just like a
Yeah.
toddler that needs a nap, because I have pushed myself to that point of exhaustion. And so, the last time that it happened, it was extreme. And I really like, it was like 4 in the afternoon and I went to bed for the day. I'm like, I can't even keep my eyes open anymore. And I'd been
Hmm.
crying all day. My poor face is all puffy. And he's thinking I'm having a psychotic break. He's freaking out. Like, what is wrong with this lady? Why is she crying? What did I do? What did she hear? Like, oh my gosh. And so when I
Hmm.
wake up the next day, like, shalom, everything's good. He's like, you got to take care of yourself. I don't know how to help you. Tell me what you need from me, but this is not sustainable. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I only have like a meltdown like this like once a year. He's like, no, you have them like every quarter, like every 3 months. You have a day where you just are completely a different person. And then I had to like reflect on that and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not, that was my self-care. Oh, wait till the dam bursts, get it all out of your system and then just keep going. That
Right.
also is not sustainable. So this year I had to be very intentional about my time. I had to be very intentional about what projects I would get involved in and what I would say yes to and what I could say no to, or how I wanted to spend my time and prioritize like where my energy was going. And I'm again, it's been over a year, no meltdowns this year. I haven't had that because I did have to acknowledge, even for myself, I can't do it all. And I think as a pace setting leader, yes, have high expectations, but realize people can't do it all, or you're going to have an organizational meltdown. Maybe people aren't crying at work and falling asleep in the middle of the day, but they are crying in their cars. They are looking, their rage applying for Indeed on their lunch breaks. It's just not sustainable, but balance, like anything else, balance.
The older I get, the more peace I want in my life. Just
Yeah.
balance. Yeah, I hear
Yeah.
you.
The last style, I guess, is it, not that I guess, it is coaching, which again I'm super biased towards as a professional coach. I really do love the coaching leadership style. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah. I tend to like this as well. And just really it's really the best pieces of a few of those styles there, right? So, where are you? How are you feeling about this? And really a lot of it is about how you're feeling, right?
Mhm.
And I had somebody in the county, a supervisor a couple months ago, and I said, well, we have a situation where you have a lot of last minute stuff and you're putting out fires and you have a to-do list to get stuff done, but you're putting out so many fires, you don't get to your to-do list. How does it make you feel? And he was in IT and he goes, well, that's work. That's my daily job. That's what I do. I said, okay, well, how does that make you feel? He goes, well, it's just what I have to deal with, right? So I just do it. I said, how does it make you feel to know that that's what you have to deal with and do it? Right. And I think it's so important for folks and those task focused folks, you know, and folks our age, I know I'm a Gen Xer, right? And I was raised by I was raised by a single mom and latchkey kid, rub some dirt on it, figure it out yourself. You can do this stuff on your own, and you're gonna have to figure out to do stuff on your own and things like that. And so I've had that attitude of just figure it out. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, but you learn and you get better. But no crying. There's no crying in baseball, right? And all those other things like that have helped me to survive and to be where I am in my life. But to stop and think about how do these things make me feel was not something that was inherently taught,
Mhm.
right? Until nowadays, folks in the younger millennials and Gen Z, they want to tell you how they feel, right? And I hear so many people, and I've had it in my head. Boy, no one ever stopped to ask me how I felt when I was coming up, right? But if I had somebody who had stopped and asked me how I felt, how much more worthwhile would those experiences have been? That's the other side of it, right? I mean, we get into that. No one taught me this, and I still figured it out. Cool. What if somebody did teach you, right? What if somebody did teach you? How much quicker would you have figured it out? How much, how many other things you would have been able to do with your time and energy in your role if someone had showed you and let you express yourself and your concerns and how you figure it out. And I think that's something that's missed a lot in um, you know, God, I hate to say older leaders because I'm an older leader now, right? But
Speak for
you know,
yourself,
just
sir.
but also, as somebody who is more relationship oriented, I get that need and I understand that need and to have those conversations with my daughter and folks her age to understand that there really is a time and space to stop and think about how this makes you feel. How do we process that? Why does it make you feel that way? And what can we do to deal with those challenges? And also, when you're feeling that way, what can we do to be able to deal with those feelings and then be able to move forward in a productive and effective way? And so, coaching has really it's come to me, especially in the last few years, to where I feel like I'm a much better person. I've always felt like I was a good listener, but I've also, you know, been a problem solver, right? And somebody comes to me with a problem, hey, I got this. I'm so frustrated. My first, well, have you thought about this? They're hiring over here. Just Google this and you can do this. And I'm sorry. This is what you need to tell them. You need to do this. And what I've realized is not everyone needs me to solve their problems.
Right.
Sometimes they just want to be heard,
Yeah.
right? And it makes a difference, right? It makes a difference with how I listen to people now. And I become a better, much more effective listener rather than just being a listener, waiting for someone to finish so I could solve their problem. And
Right.
so, yeah,
I think I appreciate coaching as a leadership style. Again, I've said a few times today, autonomy is really important to me. Um, I like coaching as a style because number one, I don't want to work harder than I have to. So, Like I'm willing to listen to your problem without making it my problem to solve.
Right.
Right. And I'm naturally nosy. I love to hear what people got going on. I'm chismosa to the
Yeah.
finest. Like oh, like tell me.
Yeah.
So coaching really like fills my cup because people, get to tell you their stories and their perspectives. And I'm so interested in that. But it also, as I don't have to solve the problem because I know that the person that I'm talking to is capable enough to solve it on themselves. So it's like in other styles where we're as a leader, you're holding people accountable. I think in the coaching style, you're holding people capable and you're really honoring like their expertise and their knowledge and their feelings and values and knowing that they're going to make the best decision for themselves. Um, when I was going through the education part of becoming a coach and going through the classes, we had to do a lot of practice coaching, and I needed so many hours to get credentialed, and so I tapped into who do I know that is at my beck and call that I can get coaching hours when I have pockets of time. I had a young adult son that lived in the same house, and so I would tell him like, hey, can I coach you for my coaching hours? And he'd say, sure, no problem. And it was really funny because even though we lived in the same house, we would do it on Zoom. So he'd be in his room and I'd be in my office, which are like 10 feet apart from each other, talking to each other through screens. But it allowed us to kind of set the boundary that I wasn't his mom, I was his coach. And again, it led me to, in that coaching mindset, to not give him advice, which as his mom, you should do this, you should do that. I would do this, I would do that. You need to think about this, and you need to think about that. But as a coach, I instead just asked him those questions to help him develop his own problem solving capacity and his own problem solving skills. And okay, if you did that, what do you think will happen? And what do you want to happen? And how could you approach that? Given those circumstances, what would be the next best thing that you could do? And all of the other, types of open-ended coaching questions that we ask. And it was really funny because he told me, I really prefer you as my coach than as my mom. I was like, wow, gee, thanks, appreciate that. And so it became like a ritual in our family. When he needed something, he would say, Mom, do you think you could coach me real quick? I have this problem going on at work. Could you coach me? And I'm like, sure. And we would go to our respective rooms. He'd go to his room and I'd go to my office and we'd get on Zoom, but 10 feet apart. And I would coach him through it because he didn't want me to tell him what to do. He wanted to be listened to be heard, to be able to work through his own problem, his feelings, his assumptions, and come up with his own solution, which he would be, of course, more likely to follow through with than
Yeah.
if I would have told him. Even though my answer would have been the right answer, it would have been the right answer for me, but not necessarily for him. And so I think like that coaching leadership style really requires that you let go of yourself as the identity of being the person who's got to fix all the problems, and really being that kind of sounding board of, I trust you enough to solve your own problems and I'll support your decision to do that.
I love that. And just like in working with social workers, right, that idea of ethnographic interviewing, right? Social workers are educated, they're credentialed, right? And they work with population and families that, sometimes, are challenged not just socially but also financially
Right.
and things like that. And so people come into every conversation and every experience with their own assumptions, right? And
Right.
so just that idea of ethnographic interviewing is about, letting the client be their guide. They tell you what they're experiencing, what their world is like, and that the social worker assumes a position of informed not knowing,
Right.
right? So I don't know, help me to better understand how you feel. And, it's really helped to guide me in my coaching practice, right? And that, the folks that I'm talking to, my clients, they are the folks who have the expertise in how they've lived their life and what's worked and what their strengths are and what their abilities are. And so, when they can address that and come to their own conclusions on things, really, I feel very often what I end up doing more than anything was helping people to acknowledge the emotional side of it, not just the logical side, right? And the problem solving side. most of the folks that we coach, they're there in their positions because they've been good problem solvers. They figured something out. They've been able to elevate themselves based off of their ability to be rational and make logical choices and be successful in whatever it is that they do. But to what extent and how has it affected, their ability to really feel and think as they, and feel how they and think about how they feel as they're going along, right? And it really, to be that leader, you don't assume anything, right? That's such an important thing. There's those concepts, epistemic privilege, right? Which is, what I know is based off of my knowledge, my experience, what I've learned and read, right? But my own experience, which leads to transcendence, which is what I know is just a drop in the bucket of what there is to know in this universe,
Yeah.
right? And so, how much more do I have to learn, even if I'm credentialed and have a PhD or am a professional coach? How much more do I have to learn and experience from this person sitting in front of me and every other person I interact with professionally and personally? And it's pretty cool. It's that
Really cool.
curiosity. Yeah,
I love
yeah.
it. I do love it. And again, I think that's one of the reasons I love coaching is that you learn. I always it's a scam, right? This is this is how I feel. It's a scam in the best way. It's a scam in the best way. It's not a scam in the sense that you're taking people's money and they're not getting anything out of it. So, in order to be a good coach, you have to be coachable. I think the most value I've ever gotten is from being coached by other coaches and being able to like work out my own thoughts and ideas. And this is why I'm so biased towards this particular style is
Yeah.
like I have received a lot of personal value from being coached and learned a lot about me from me because I had a good
Mhm,
coach that led me down that path of self-discovery, and really kind of it facilitated my own growth through
mhm,
and a good coach. And so when I say I joke about it all the time about coaching being a scam, but it's definitely not. It's such a valuable thing. But as a coach, sometimes it's hard to like give yourself the value for what you do because you're actually not doing the problem solving, right? And most of the
mhm,
times as leaders, we get our value from solving the problems, from having the answers, from, being the expert. And as a coach, you really have to allow that space for the other person to be all of those things. And so, the value of being a good coach is to be that neutral, non-judgmental, open sounding board to share your observations and let people think for themselves. But at the end, you're like, what did I even really do right now?
Well, that's yeah. So
But
I get what
that's
you're saying.
magic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. What we just had a conversation, but and it can feel like a scam because like you said, I'm not coming up with all these wonderful things. I'm really allowing them to come up with their wonderful things, and there's a formula,
Right.
and it's intentional. Even those of us who are relationship focused, like you and
Yeah.
I'm so relationship focused. I want to ease that person's pain. And how am
Right.
I going to ease that person's pain? With what I think is best. And you know what? That's completely the opposite
Yeah.
of what a coach is, right? So
Exactly.
I intentionally say, okay, this has worked for me, but let's find what works for this person. Let's see
Mhm.
what they feel is the best way forward. And, and to really exhaust all of those things before you give any type of, feedback that might be helpful, right? I mean, I will provide tools and conversation thoughts to folks, but it's only after I've asked them what do they do and how do they do it and what do they find works for them, what has been challenges for them, right? So, okay, so maybe they are, what I need, if I offer a tool and they say, well, yeah, I already do that, I feel like I fail because that's okay. I have not
Right.
listened well enough, right? And it may not happen the first time, like you mentioned. You may end up having a conversation where maybe there didn't feel like there was. I mean, I've had some coaching conversations these last couple of weeks where I feel like I'm just listening to somebody vent, but I also know that the next conversation they're going to know that I will listen to them, and then if I listen to them, it starts to build that trust, and if we build that trust, then maybe and then we can turn a corner, and vulnerability can start to come to play. So.
Yeah.
because we're
You
only
know,
vulnerable with those people we trust.
true. Very, very true. You know, when using that coaching style, I like to call it the coach approach. I don't know, it just sounds cute, but uh, there
Coach
are, of
first.
course, like anything else, here I come again. There are always going to be limitations. Number one, not everything's coachable.
Hmm.
Sometimes somebody will come to you and say, "Hey, Carl, where do we keep blue pens?" I'm not going to go, "Oh, where do you think we should keep blue pens?" I'm going to tell you
Yeah,
they're over there, right? Or if we
yeah.
don't have any, get a hold of supplies, and this is the form you use.
Or if
So
we have a
you
deadline, yeah,
exactly. So not everything's
yeah,
coachable, but the other thing too is not everyone is open to coaching.
right,
You know, there's times where you really are trying to empower someone to come up with their own solution and they just don't want to, they don't want to hear it, they don't want to think about it. Just tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it.
yeah.
And that's not any like lack of effectiveness of you as a coach. It's just some people are just not coachable and that's okay too, right?
You know what I found lately is I had I had a client, a coachee, and she said, you know, Carl, I tried the coaching last month, and I sat down with one of my direct reports, and we were talking, and I was asking him those questions, and he stopped me and said, "What are you trying to do? What are you trying to get at? What's your angle?"
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
because if you don't usually, if you're not used to being coached or if you're not used to coaching, it can, because it is a formula and it can be intentional. And if it does not, if you recognize that you're being intentional and you're trying to establish a new paradigm, it can sound contrived.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I said, well, that's, you know, how'd that make you feel? She goes, you're doing that to me right now. I said, well,
It's a
she goes,
scam.
well, I didn't, yeah. And she said, well, I didn't, you know, I didn't know exactly what to do. I said, okay, well, so are you going to have another coaching session? She goes, should I? I said, well, I would, you know, I mean, if you do it once and then you don't do it for 6 months and then you decide you want to do it again, you know, what's the norm and what's the thing that we're trying to start new, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need
Mm-hmm.
to create a new normal. And how do you think you can create that new normal? She goes, well, by continuing. I said, is the coaching something that you want to do? Yeah, I want to do it. I said, okay, well then, you know, how, whenever you start something new, how do you make it something that it becomes normal? Well, we continue to do it. I said, okay. And so, you know, what is the best way forward? Well, I'll keep doing it, even though, you know, they're gonna look at me weird. I said, well, if they look at you weird, you know, for a few times, and you know, if it happens for a while and they still look at you weird, then, you know, come talk to me. We can talk about maybe some of the questions you're asking. But if it's just because they're not used to you asking them what their best thoughts are or how they feel about things without offering your advice and your best practices, you know, that's something that's natural.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
I always say if people are uncomfortable when you coach them, you're doing it right, you know,
yeah,
because it does,
yeah,
you know, we're just so used to being fed the answers. And when you make people start thinking for themselves, it definitely, it's a paradigm shift. They will be thrown
yeah.
off like, oh, you just don't want to help me. I really do want to help you. And I believe that you can help yourself. But, you know, coaching, like anything else, it's a skill set. And oftentimes we're not good at it when we first start. I certainly wasn't.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
certainly wasn't. It took me a long time to find my ground. I'm still learning. I'm still practicing and finding my
yeah.
groove. But you know, with all of these leadership styles, I will say there's not any one size fits all that's going to be effective in every single circumstance. And I think the real key to being a great leader is just being flexible. I have one of my phrases that I love and I kind of live my life by it. And that is if you stay flexible, you never get bent out of shape. I
Oh, I
just
like
live
that.
by that. And I try to keep that in my mind, you know, because life is unpredictable and people are unpredictable and circumstances are unpredictable. And so whatever, you know, happens, I just try to think, okay, how can I stay flexible here? Maybe I had a plan, but the plan's not working. What else can I do that's going to be helpful here? How do I adapt? And so, you know, regardless of what your default style is, whether it's a coach or authoritative or, you know, cohesive, what
Coercive.
coercive.
Yeah.
I don't like coercive so much. I hate even saying it. I don't like that one. But whatever it is, um, there's a time and a place for each of them. And as a really effective leader, It's just staying within that flexibility and really trying to do what's best, whatever the circumstances are. And, when it works, great, keep it going. And if it's not working, try something else, even if it doesn't come naturally to you. It's all about developing the skill set
Yep,
and why you should go
absolutely.
to training. Oh, sorry, I'm just and why you should go to training, right? So you can learn
Yeah,
some different skills and different skill sets. I don't know. For me, I'm a lifelong learner, so I'm always looking for a new way to approach work. I think that's why I challenge the status quo so much is like you mentioned earlier, whatever your knowledge is, it's a drop in the bucket. There's so many other ways of doing things that could be potentially more effective than what you're doing now. And so if you just again keep that flexibility and that like lifelong curiosity open, that will show in the way that you lead other people.
yeah, I hear you. And so, and just some questions to go with what we've been talking about, with
Mhm.
the leadership styles for our folks, our friends out there, is think about those six different styles and, which of them do you use with the greatest level of competence? Which is the one you feel most accomplished in? Um, and think about, which is the most difficult for you, right?
Mhm.
Because the ones that you use that you have the most competence in, the one that maybe is a little more natural to you, are the ones you're going to end up playing with mostly. And like we said, there's pros and cons, and there's time and places for each one of these, right? So the ones that we use that come easiest to us or that we're most accomplished in, we'll use more than the ones that are challenging for us. And things that are challenging for us, we try to rush through,
Mhm.
right? And if we have to do them, we try to get them done as quick as possible. And so, think about those things that you do, well, or that you're competent in. What are things that are challenging for you? And the things that are challenging for you, how would you like to invest in growing those, right? And thinking about how I can be more of that person, right? And so, I coercive. I'm not a coercive person. I don't like to do as I say, not as they're just because I said so. But I also know if things need to get done quickly, we need a quick turnaround. And this is something we've done before. There is a time and place to say, okay,
Right.
we got to get this done. We don't have time. All right, your room has to be clean. We're leaving in half an hour. You need to pick that stuff up. Let's go.
Right.
Right. And so that's, sometimes the band-aid has to be ripped off, especially if it's been on there for 3 weeks and it ain't doing anything for anybody anymore. So, but
I'm
so
imagining that band-aid right now, and it's not a good image in my mind. So let's not go there.
yeah,
A
yeah.
3 week old band-aid is
3 week
funky.
old band-aid, that it's part of your body now. So yeah.
Gross. I'm grossed out.
All
No,
right.
I agree though. I agree. Just, you know, lean into the hard stuff. I lean into it. As leaders, we want people to grow and develop and, develop their best practices and continuously move forward. So as a leader, you first. You've got to be willing to do it first. And if you set a good example, then the people who follow you will follow that example. And so they're definitely a product of how you choose to lead. And so if you don't have the right followers, then I say pay attention to how you're leading. It might not be
Amen to
them, it
that.
might be you.
We have spent a lot of time talking about leadership styles and also just um, introducing you to who we are and what we're about. So we're going to keep this as regular as possible. And we look forward to seeing you again on our next episode. So this is Get Real with Tiff and Carl, and please take care of yourself.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.